Good morning. My name is Janet. Good morning. My name is Janet Evans, and I serve as a member of the UUCB Board of Trustees. And one thing I love about this congregation, it's our mission, how we strive to connect bravely with each other. We deepen our spirituality by going to church services and other activities. We actively embody justice by making our voices heard. And we love. We always love. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. I want to take a moment to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. If you're joining us online, fill out the visitor form at the link in the description, and we'd really love to connect with you. Now, some of us, we're bringing our best selves to this space. And some of us, we're bringing our struggling selves. All of us are welcome here, and all of us are loved. Some of us, we already have open hearts, and some of us, we aren't quite there yet, because our hearts have gotten a little beat up this week and might have forgotten how to trust and open. Your heart is welcome here, no matter how bruised. We welcome you among us. All of us are imperfect, but we're here to drop our defenses and trust that what happens in worship is powerful and life-giving. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together, it makes each of us braver and more compassionate and wiser than we woke up this morning. We welcome you here. I have a few announcements this morning. So, first, you may have noticed in the messenger email that Reverend Dana was listed to preach this morning, and I just wanted to say this was a test to see how closely you read the messenger. In fact, it was just a typo because, okay. Secondly, mark your calendar for Friday, November 4th. Friday, November 4th from 6 to 8 p.m. for our first community night since before the pandemic. Bring a potluck dish to share and enjoy the company. A sing-along with the Chancel Cats Band and games for all ages. And finally, after the service today, please enjoy your coffee and the extra munchies provided by the board. And join us back here in the sanctuary to hear a short update from Board President Will Kropp about key priorities this year and an invitation to our visioning process. Then representatives of the Strategic Initiatives Committee, which is known as C, they're going to work to discern next steps for our building and will explain their early work and processes, so please join us. And we will live stream this event, so online members and friends just simply use the same link for the church service to join us.
It is always a balancing act of how many announcements to begin a service with, but the auction committee said I could wear this hat if I made an announcement about the auction. Saturday, November 12th at 6 p.m., our auction dinner happens. It's a great lasagna dinner. There's going to be food and fun and drinks. There's a whole lot of things for a silent auction, but then we'll also do a live auction on a few things then. After the service, find someone who is not me wearing this hat and get a ticket from them, because that way we know how many to plan for and how much lasagna to prepare. I'm not doing that every Sunday. I wear many hats, but we are here to face the truth about ourselves, about this faith we love and the ways that it presently serves others in the world. We're here also to open ourselves to ways it and we can be better, more joyfully reflecting our potential, our core values. We want to know the ways we're bound to one another as well as to larger religious movement beyond our sight and vision. We say we're open and diverse, yet it's easy to feel stuck in old paths, in stubborn habits, reflecting not so much tradition as comfort. We want to answer the call of service to a world that needs our message, our hope, our energy. And so we're gathered to learn and to unlearn, to hear and to move forward. We rise in body or spirit. Let's begin singing together.
Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me with all of our voices and all of our visions? Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me with all of our voices and all of our visions? Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? All of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Instead of a wisdom story for you this morning, I have a wisdom 3D printed piece of plastic. Yeah, thank you. Round of applause for plastic. No. Here we go. So if I hold this thing, we've got the blown up version of this because this is a pretty small thing. If I hold this up to you and face it straight towards you, what shape is that? There you go. If I hold it, though, if you'll advance to the next slide, if I hold it from this side, and I hold it up to you, yeah, you got a square in this section. And then the last one, if you'll show the last slide, you've got a cross section. A little hard to see, but what shape is that? There you go. So here is a single object that is in one section a circle, and in one section a square, and in one section a triangle. And I keep this, and for years, ever since this was printed in the very early days of 3D printing when this was very fancy, I've kept this close to me, always on my desk or nearby, as a reminder that reality, that truth, that life, that our own lives, that each of us are more than just a singular story. We're not just circles or triangles or squares. That the stories we tell ought to be more complicated than that. They ought to say that we can include different shapes. We can include the good and the bad and the ugly all together. And telling a story that includes the bad doesn't mean the good didn't happen. Telling a story that includes the good doesn't mean the bad didn't happen. And it's never worth arguing over what shape is this really. Now, is this really a circle? Or is it really a square? Or is it really a triangle? Well, the answer, of course, is yes, obviously. And if you'll show the next slide, the last one for this. It's a little tough to see, but this is a 3/4 view of the thing. And you can see that it's both all of those shapes and it's none of them exactly. There's no one singular essence that it all distills down into. It's just pieces and slices of the whole. And that's part of what we try to do. That's part of what we come here to practice, both in our own spiritual journeys and in the way we treat each other and dwell together and connect with each other. remembering that no one, ourselves included, is their worst day or their best. That all of it is pieces of a whole bigger than any one of those slices.
Our flaming chalice, it's the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith, and it suggests, perhaps, that within our separate selves burns a flame of unity and connection and compassion. Once felt, that fire cannot be extinguished, and so we gather, weaving our lives together. I'd like to invite Sarah Volman to light this morning's chalice.
Hi, my name is Sarah Volman. I've given other chalice lightings here before, but now I finally have the courage to say how I became a UU. I was raised without religion in a community of mostly Jewish people and Asian Protestants, and I always wanted to find my niche. At first, I learned about Judaism by going to friends' bar and bat mitzvahs, Passover seders, and Shabbat dinners. I knew liberal Christianity existed, so I went to my grandmother's Progressive Episcopal Church for a while, and even tried Quaker meeting. When I moved to Boston after college, I finally discovered First Parish in Cambridge, where I learned that Unitarianism and Universalism were part of a whole progressive tradition within U.S. history. A lot of people in that congregation had lived abroad like my family. It felt like we had a whole new way to be Americans. When I moved to Boulder in 2010, I was disappointed that it didn't have as much UU history as Greater Boston. But what excites me about UUism is that we are making history. We have a new minister, we're exploring changes to our building, and the movement is actually growing in the Front Range area. I light this chalice for our church family.
We are not bound together by creed, a specific list of things we all believe exactly the same way. We are united by shared values, expressed in our 7 principles, and by the commitments we make to each other about what creates this community. To name that commitment, will you join together in person and online and speak our covenant aloud as one? We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to speak the truth divine. So be it.
Will you join me in silence of prayer and meditation, a silence of listening? I'll invite you to find a comfortable way to sit, your feet on the floor, arms supported, a string pulling you up at the top of the crown of your head to sit comfortably. And the point of all that isn't that there's one right way to sit that makes you more holy or something. The point of it is that in this practice, you're trying to listen and pay attention to the whispers of your spirit within or beyond, to the quiet voice of self. You're trying to listen, and sitting in that comfortable, supported sort of way helps your body quiet down a little so that you can enter into that silence. Let's take a breath all together. And another, slower, deeper. Call to mind someone who you love, someone who you care for. And maybe if people are giving you trouble this week, maybe that's a pet. But this is a compassion practice, so we start where you are. Call them to mind, see them as best you can. And then inside yourself, in your heart or your spirit, it's like there is a door behind which is care and compassion, is love and patience and tolerance, is playfulness and delight. And holding that person in mind who you love, the work in this moment is to open that door and to feel, not to think about how you care for them, but to feel it in your body or your heart, your spirit. We'll breathe into that 3 slow breaths, sending love. And call to mind now, and in your mind's eye, see as best you can someone who annoys you. We're not going to skip straight to hate. Incrementally, someone who annoys you, who bothers you, someone you've been carrying a grudge about all week, someone who's just been obnoxious. And look, you don't need to open that compassion door inside you wide open. The practice here is to start where you are, to crack it open just a little bit and holding that person in your mind's eye as best you can to feel love, to feel compassion. It's not excuse or avoidance if they've done something wrong to you, but it's saying to yourself, even in the midst of that, still I can find a place that cares for this person, that cares about this person. And for 3 breaths, we'll breathe into that. And finally, and maybe most difficult, is to turn that practice inwards to yourself, to imagine yourself in your mind's eye, or to place a hand over your heart with gentle pressure against you. And for yourself to direct that same love and care inwards, that you are not your worst day, that you are not wrong or broken, that you are complicated just like everyone else, with good things and bad things, actions that you're proud of and actions that you're not. And to hold yourself in a love and compassion that doesn't judge or weigh or measure, that doesn't assign your heart a letter grade, but instead that holds you gently, caring for yourself like you would a child. We'll be together in silence for 3 breaths. Amen. Friends, I appreciate so much that you are a congregation that practices together. And it may be that in any given week, whatever that spiritual practice we use doesn't meet you where you are, or doesn't speak to you, and so next week we do different things. But I appreciate that we're a congregation not just who thinks critically and engages the world through thought, but also works on our experience of it together. Each week when we gather, we come forward and take a stone and place it into the earth. It symbolizes your joys and your cares, the weight of them. It symbolizes how they take their place in something larger than any of us individually, that they take their place. The things you worry the most over and the things you celebrate among everything else in this community. And when one person is grieving, we mourn together, and when one person is happy, we rejoice together. And all of that's happening all the time. For those meeting in person, as the music begins, I invite you to come forward as you feel moved and take a stone and place it in the earth, mingling with each other, held in something larger than any of us. And I'll place a first stone for our members, Kathy Edwards and Rebecca Carnarius. Their father, Stan, died this week. They'd celebrated his 98th birthday with him this summer.
Night I wander free, my mind to roam on thoughts of thee. With midnight darkness beckoning, my heart towards mystic fantasy. This night in June, and here upon the velvet dew, I weep with joy beneath the moon. My sight, and yet my feet with pure delight trod onward through the blackened veil, beneath the starry sky so bright. hang my eyes to sleep, my soul, my seething soul cries to thee, my singing soul cries to thee, my singing soul, it cries to thee. Come sing with me. Come sing. Come and sing with
One of my favorite conversation threads that emerges from time to time among my Unitarian Universalist minister colleagues is cringeworthy moments in Unitarian Universalist history. One person suggested we could start with the infamous Unitarians, and then we could move on to the Unitarian Universalists we are simply embarrassed to mention. So with that said, you know where I'm going. Raised as a Universalist, David Starr Jordan graduated from Cornell University in 1872. In his 3 years there, he earned both a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science, which caused them to institute a rule that you couldn't get both at the same time anymore. 3 years later, he had earned a medical degree. He spent a decade teaching zoology and making brilliant discoveries in the study of blind cave fish. He and his students identified more than 2,000 species of fish, not all of them in caves, during his career. In 1885, he became president of Indiana University, where he implemented one of the earliest liberal arts curriculum in the United States. Just 6 years later, he became the founding president of Stanford University and the founding director of the Sierra Club. He gave himself the middle name Starr with 2 R's after Thomas Starr King, a famous Unitarian minister, sometimes credited with keeping California as a free state rather than a slave state. David Starr Jordan was brilliant and effective and deeply committed to excellence in higher education. He steered Stanford through financial crisis and the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake. He raised money for the ACLU to put on the defense of the Scopes monkey trial. He worked diligently for world peace. He advocated widely. He had 18 books published by the American Unitarian Association. Was one of the most popular speakers in the early 1900s, advocated widely for a religion that takes scientific knowledge as seriously as our direct spiritual experience and tradition. And we see that legacy today. We are that tradition. And that was the first shoe, this is the other shoe. In 1900, he wrote a book published by the American Unitarian Association called Blood of a Nation. And with a title like that in 1900, you know it's not going to be good. Every single one of the 33 years he spent in higher education, he gave a course of lectures on why eugenics was critically important to prevent race mixing and preserve the greatness of this Anglo-Saxon nation. He dressed it up in academic language and scientific discourse. But what he said was that it was imperative to begin a program of eugenics and forced sterilization to preserve Anglo-Saxons. The purpose of the study of eugenics, he wrote, is to know the kind of ancestors we should pick for the next generation. Careful on who "we" is in that sentence. He said there are two consequences. The first piece of that work is encouraging a tendency towards wiser mating on the part of men and women of intelligence and education. The second effort is the limitation by public authority of reproduction for the defective, the insane, and the criminal. He went on to say things like, survival of the unfittest is the primal cause of the downfall of nations. He wrote, regrettably, of the heat of the tropics, the warmth of tropics around the world, which allowed people to live long enough to reproduce, who he said ought to have died earlier. Cringeworthy moments in Unitarian Universalist history. A person's resume obviously can be written and read in a lot of different ways. And what are we to do with that complexity? David Starr Jordan was ludicrously, absurdly racist. David Starr Jordan profoundly, unambiguously shaped American higher education for the better. What do we do with the fact that he did all sorts of good in the world and all sorts of profound bad? He made higher education one of the engines of democracy in this nation and spent most of his academic career dressing up bigotry in the clothing of academic justification. Well, I don't pretend to have all the answers to how to deal with all of that. But I've got a starting point for sure, and that's to tell the whole story without avoiding or denying the ugly, horrible parts of it. Here's what not to do. In an entry on Jordan in the online Unitarian Universalist biographical database, an otherwise really excellent online resource, there is a 2,000-word entry on Jordan. By comparison, I've got about 1,600 words for you today. In that 2,000-word entry, there are 118 on his racism. And let me read it to you in full. In a section talking about his pacifism and its virtue, the author says Jordan's pacifist convictions were in part based on the pseudoscience of eugenics. It's really hard to do this without sarcasm. He believed that war destroyed the best of humanity, leaving the weaker members of society to produce the next generation. He nevertheless did not support the more radical implications of eugenics. The artificial breeding of the Superman, he said, would defeat its own ends. It would breed out of existence the two most important factors the race has won, love and initiative. That is how formal, academic, journalistic language conceals reality. It wasn't that Jordan thought whites were superior and that the Anglo-Saxon should not meet the Negro, the Indian, the Mexican as fellow citizens equal before the law. It wasn't that. It was merely that his great virtue of pacifism happened to be based on some pseudoscientific views. In this sort of a biography, he isn't particularly awful. After all, breeding a Superman would mean breeding out love and initiative, and to him, those were the most important things, the values, surely, that we share too. The UU biographical database is noteworthy not for the way that it talks about him, but for its ordinariness, in how that entry on him mirrors the way we talk about so many great men of history. It's notable for its ordinary erasure or omission, maybe from shame or embarrassment. It's notable for its omission of the infamous. Jordan provided, through his work and his students, the so-called scientific justification for California's 1909 forced sterilization law, a law not repealed until the 1970s, under which more than 20,000 men and women in mental hospitals and prisons were sterilized against their will and often without their knowledge, so that their inferior blood would not be passed on. And in the 1930s, California's sterilization law became a model for sterilization laws passed in Nazi Germany. So our work first is to tell a more complete, a more nuanced story of our ancestors. That's the good and the bad and the ugly. Telling the whole story means that we don't defend the bad behavior, we don't minimize or justify. It's so tempting to say that Jordan's eugenics, that racist interest, was just a product of its time. Evolution was a new branch of science. Jordan's real interest, his real interest was to promote the common welfare, was to promote the flourishing of a country not even 150 years old. How could he have known better? Why, indeed, should we even dwell on his racism at all, given we all know how bad it is? The authors Rita Nakashima-Brock and Rebecca Parker, I return to them often. They've written, "We cannot lament and we cannot transform what we reject or deny and refuse to engage. How can we grieve the suffering that is real if we pretend not to see it? How can we transform the everyday language that conceals injustices all the time, everywhere, right now, if we don't name them and their reality?" So, okay, we tell the whole story. We don't defend the bad behavior. We don't justify it or minimize it or avoid it. This is very uncomfortable, but the next thing to do, I think, is not to try to balance the scales. Because often, I know that my own reflexive instinct, reading about a guy like this, is to render judgment. I want to render judgment. I want to put all the good things over here, and I want to put all the bad things over here, and I want to figure out where it all lies, and kind of put a letter grade on that, right? Abraham Lincoln, A+, clearly. David Starr Jordan, I don't know, D-? Like, what? I'm not sure where that shakes out. But that's not the task. That's not the task. That's about, in some ways, that's about conflict avoidance. Once I've assigned this person good or bad, I have to deal with the complexity of it and more. It's also, I think, about our own internal instinct toward perfectionism, right? Our heroes ought to be all good or all bad, but not all complicated. Our task instead is to hold it all without celebration, without fear. It's to do this work, this circle, triangle, square work, to say, yes, the fact that there's a circle there does not remove the reality of the square over there. Part of what this image does for me is it takes away, it counsels against the impulse to essentialize, to say that this whole person ought to be boiled down into one label, good, bad, indifferent. But there is no essentializing. The good things that Jordan did don't have to be false for the bad things to be true. In 2019 and 2020 at Stanford, as the movement for Black Lives reshaped the conversation in the country, a group of students and professors and administrators gathered to ask this question: what are we going to do with David Starr Jordan, our founding president whose name shows up on buildings and streets and classrooms. And in part, one of their conclusions was that what is essential is to tell a more complete and nuanced story. Our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person, not the inherent worth and dignity of every person's actions, not the inherent worth and dignity of every person's weird, racist, eugenic belief. The inherent worth and dignity of their person. Was Jordan a bad person? It's not my job to parse that. He did things which clearly violated the inherent worth and dignity of others. I'm not here to judge his soul or spirit or something, but to name his actions and their impact and tell a nuanced story. But in that process, the third piece of counsel I'd offer is not to descend into outrage. It is so sweet and delicious and wonderful to be righteous and right and explain loudly to the rest of the world how they're all idiots. I mean, even if you feel guilty, it feels good too, right? But that's not telling a nuanced story. That's just the opposite. Instead of saying the person's all good, it's saying they're all bad. It's not about making that sort of a judgment. I think this is part of the essential question when people talk about cancel culture, which gets thrown around now, weaponized. The question that's really underneath that, the real canceling question, the sharp question is, who will our heroes be? And will we be honest about it? We get to choose, seeing all of the complexity, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We get to choose, does that statue stay on the pedestal? Does his name stay on the building? Do we honor and celebrate our heroes? I think so often, though, it's tempting, it's easy to fall into the trap of not just saying, no, that name should come off the building, but of gleefully and joyfully and sweetly and deliciously being righteous and right in a world full of people who just don't get it. I think those two things get conflated. They get woven and wound together. And sometimes I see people reactive to notions of cancel culture, but it's become a caricature. The loudest voices yelling down everyone else, that's a caricature of the sharp question, which is who will our heroes be and what story will we tell about them? The question of how we hold all of this in others is also about how we hold the story we tell about our own life, our own selves. The sharp question is one that reflects back on us again. The work we're trying to do with these forebears is also work we need to apply to ourselves, to be honest with ourselves in telling the whole story of our whole lives. That we've got some good and we've got some bad, and we don't need to minimize or justify the bad, and we don't need to look at the good as if that's the end of who we really are. We've got to hold it lightly. We are, as we say so often, a promise-making people, and that's good, and a promise-breaking people, and that's bad, and a promise-remaking people, and that's complicated. Our work, in the same way that we turn it out into the world, is not to rise into personal zealotry of how great and right and wonderful we are, not to take the bait that we're either perfect or we're broken, not to descend into despair. When we give ourselves permission to see the ways that our heroes were imperfect, we give ourselves permission to face our own imperfection too. Although having said that, none of you should go out and start doing eugenics. That's an extra step. We face the past in order to face the present. And wrestling with Jordan's legacy gives us practice wrestling with our own legacy. And it lets us take a deep collective breath. We're people, we miss the mark. We can begin again and choose differently. Our ancestors weren't broken irredeemably, they were complicated. And you're not broken either. But we are complicated. The writer Annie Dillard reads Psalm 24 from the Hebrew Scriptures, which says that only those with clean hands and pure hearts are worthy to ascend the hill of the Lord, which you could interpret as only those who are pure of heart, perfectly clean, perfectly pure, are worthy enough to be in the presence of the holy. She reads that and goes a real different direction, and I close with her words. She says, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? There is no one but us. There's no one to send, nor a clean hand, nor a pure heart on the face of the earth, nor in the earth, but only us. A generation comforting ourselves with the notion that we have come at an awkward time, that our innocent fathers are dead, as if innocence had ever been, our children are busy and troubled, and we ourselves unfit, not yet ready, having each of us chosen wrongly, made a false start, failed, yielded to impulse and the tangled comfort of pleasures, and grown exhausted, unable to seek the thread, weak, involved. But there is no one but us," she says. There never has been. There have been generations which remembered it and generations which forgot. But there's never been a generation of whole people who lived well even one day. And yet some have imagined well with honesty and art the detail of such a life and have described it with such grace that we mistake vision for history and dream for description and fancy that life has devolved. So, you learn this, studying any history at all, especially the lives of artists and visionaries. You learn it from Emerson, who noticed that the meanness of our days is itself worthy of thought. And you learn it, I hope, fitful in your pew in church. Amen. Can you rise in body or spirit? Are we singing together, Ben?
Do we have words on the board?
Yeah, let's sing together.
Let's do it.
Let's sing.
Awesome. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are grandmother's prayers, and we are grandfather's dreamings.
This month, our offering goes to Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. So when people think about Planned Parenthood, they usually think about their healthcare services. However, another core pillar of their mission is to provide comprehensive sex education. Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains has a responsible sex education institute that offers a variety of programming options that meet our community's needs. Their trained sex education experts are skilled at facilitating groups of all ages and abilities in a variety of settings such as schools, community organizations, and churches. In their last fiscal year, RSEI reached 18,780 students through their direct education programs, and they trained 608 faculty members on sex ed curriculums to implement in their schools. Parents and caregivers can also find a variety of resources on their website so they are better prepared to have open and honest conversations about sex and sexuality with the youth in their lives. You can also text the word TALK, T-A-L-K, to 57890 to opt into their free text line for guardians. Once opted in, feel free to ask a question about how to respond to your youth, and one of their sexperts will respond within 24 hours. Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains also offers a similar text line and Instagram account, In Case You're Curious, is a way for youth to anonymously ask reproductive health questions, ranging from, is there one brand of condom that works better than others, to why is my period irregular, and everything in between. Last year, their In Case You're Curious text line provided over 1,000 responses to sexual health questions. For more information about Planned Parenthood sex ed programs, visit www.responsiblesexedinstitute. I invite you to give as generously as you're able. For those online, you can use the QR code or find a link in the video description. For those gathered in person, you can scan the QR code or make a donation as the ushers now pass the baskets. May our gifts be used to enact justice, bringing peace and love to the Boulder community.
Our offering is an outward, a visible manifestation of an inward commitment to changing lives and changing this community. We receive it with gratitude. Thank you. We go onwards, holding the stories of those who came before us, all those ancestors and our own stories, in the fullness of their complexity, good, bad, and ugly, not broken, not blameless heroes either, but all of it and everything in between, promise making, promise breaking, promise remaking, complicated. Will you rise in body or in spirit? We'll close in song.